Kia ora, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Gia and I'll be your MC for tonight. I'm actually ex-Crimson student, obviously now working for Crimson Education as well. And I'm actually helping launch the same online high school that John, our speaker today, is the principal of. Just before we start, I want to say I'm actually absolutely blown away by the number of people we've got tuned in tonight. We can't see each other, obviously, but I think we've got 250 people live on this webinar right now. That number is obviously so exciting to me, but it's also such a massive testament to just how much COVID has shaken up this year for all of us, really. And I imagine a lot of you on this call are joining us today because that's not a particularly comforting feeling. As a student, it's honestly really hard to feel like you're trying your best but still falling behind academically. And I know it's challenging for parents too when you don't have a lot of visibility over your child's learning, and nor do you have a clear sense of really how to best support them during this time. That said, I think that times of crisis also tend to be times of, tremendous opportunity. And the fact that you're here today probably implies that you share some of that optimism. So I'm very, very lucky to be joined by John. John, like many of us here today, is a parent and a grandparent too, right, John?
Correct. Yeah.
And to that effect, really, he's going through a lot of the same challenges that all of us are, but he also has a really inspiring legacy as an educator who's been around for a lot. I'll introduce him formally in a second, but John is an absolute pioneer in New Zealand education space, and he's a really strong advocate for schools being open-minded to change, even beyond our current circumstance of a global pandemic that's really left us with no other option. John is also the executive principal of Crimson Global Academy, a global online high school that was launched just in April this year, which is coincidentally right when New Zealand went into its first lockdown. Launching an entire school during an unfolding global pandemic is obviously not an easy feat, but what I find particularly inspiring is that Crimson Global Academy already has 100 students from 18 countries enrolled. So really, while the rest of the world has been scrambling to pivot to online learning with varying degrees of success, CGA students have had continuous access to world-class teachers and structured learning all throughout this period. So you could definitely say that John knows a thing or two about making education work in an uncertain landscape, and really overcoming the unique challenges associated with that. So before we formally begin, I'd just like to briefly outline the structure of tonight. Though John needs no introduction at this point, I'll begin by giving you a little bit of his educational background, and then I'll interview John and we'll discuss, firstly, the disruption that COVID has caused to education, and secondly, what we can do tangibly as students and parents to address that and keep ahead of our learning. John and I are going to keep this super conversational, and we'd love for you to chime in as well with your own thoughts. So if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A function on your screen, and we'll try to answer these throughout the webinar. So I've done a lot of talking, just hang in with me a little bit longer, because I want to just talk about John a little bit and give you a bit of background on him. Now, there's a lot I can say about John, and he has quite a ridiculously long list of achievements, but he started off as a history teacher, so I'd love to share a little bit of history with you. John's significant influence within New Zealand and the global education sector began when he graduated from the University of Auckland in 1973. John was the principal of Takapuna Grammar before being appointed as a headmaster of Auckland Grammar School, which, for those of you who don't know, is New Zealand's premier high-performing state school. And that was a position he held for almost 20 years. A visionary in curriculum development, he moved the school away from the local NCA system to the globally recognized and respected Cambridge International system, which I'm sure a lot of you on this call are quite familiar with. I have a fun fact, which is that John was actually the first educator to bring Cambridge to New Zealand. And though I call this a fun fact, it was very much unimagined at the time. And I'd say it's really big testament to John's commitment to providing his students with the best educational opportunities the world has to offer. John was also the founding chairman of the Association of Cambridge schools in New Zealand, and he's held a lot of governance roles within other prominent boards, like the chair of ACG Education Council as well. In 2012, after his many, many achievements, John was made an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit for his services to education as well. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce John Morris, Executive Principal of Crimson Global Academy. John, I'd like to begin, by saying you've seen a lot of success in such a number of fields, and I'm really curious to know why you're passionate about education and what specifically inspired you to pursue a career in this field.
Well, thanks, Pierre, and welcome everybody on the seminar or webinar, whichever way we look at it. I guess the main thing is that I've always enjoyed learning, and I've enjoyed school. And I had parents who were very encouraging, but certainly not pushy parents at all. I mean, they grew up in the 1930s depression and didn't have the opportunity to go to a solid school and a good school. So they were encouraging myself and my brother at that time. And in those days, I was living in the north of England, just outside of Manchester. And I think what really stimulated my interest in education was I had to sit the 11 plus exam, which was an exam everybody sat in UK in those days to go on to a school from there on. And it was a selective school that I got into, a grammar school. So that really got me motivated. And then just settling into that, my family moved to New Zealand. And I was very fortunate to attend Kelston Boys High in those days in West Auckland, where I had two fantastic history teachers. And really they turned me on to the subject and also turned me on to teaching as well, because it was obviously they enjoyed their job. They were there every day, they were motivated and inspiring. And so teaching seemed to me a logical thing to do, because I could teach my subject I loved, but also I could coach football and cricket, which I also loved as well. So it was a no-brainer.
That's awesome. John, you've held quite a number of senior positions at secondary schools that, at least within New Zealand, are known for quite a long history of tradition, whereas many might consider CGA, for those of you in the audience who it's Crimson Global Academy, as being quite innovative or even disruptive. I'm really curious how your career as an educator led you to founding and leading a school of such a different nature.
Yeah, well, it is very different from my background. There's no doubt about that, coming from traditional bricks and mortar schools. But I got involved with Crimson around about 3 years ago when Jamie Beaton, who's the founder and CEO of Crimson, asked me to get involved in doing some research work for him, which I did. And then last year, he asked me to be involved in trying to get an online high school up and running, which required, of course, permission with the Ministry of Education. And that was not an easy thing to do because there was no regulations around online high schools. So we had to follow the normal regulations setting up a private school, which was quite complex. But we got there in the end, and I think it was around about September, October, we gained permission to open an online high school. So from that time on, then Jamie said, well, hey, you've been involved in this, you might as well carry on and look after the launching of the school as the executive principal. So that's how I got involved, and it's been exciting, it's been challenging, it's been frustrating at times, but it's also very innovative and quite exciting to be involved in something that is brand new and in some ways leading the way. We are certainly a disruption in the New Zealand education scene, that's for sure.
Absolutely. You must have met some pretty incredible students during your time as headmaster at so many schools. I'm curious, are there any commonality between these students, and what characteristics and qualities do you observe among students who go on to achieve a lot of great success beyond school?
Yeah, that's a tough one. There's 2,500 boys at grammar, so to pick out one or two boys would be pretty tricky. But obviously there's a range of sportsmen, of musicians, of actors, and particularly of academics as well who've gone through the school. And I think that the major characteristics that they have are that they're all really highly motivated. They're aspirational. They want to get to the very top. But to do that, they also had that work ethic, which is a really important factor. You can be as bright as you want, but unless you're going to work hard, you're not really going to get where you want to be. They're also intelligent, obviously. That really boils down to that, to be honest. The top sportsman, you can probably think about somebody called Dougie Howlett, who was head boy at grammar in 1996 and was also a very good scholar. And, of course, became one of the leading All Blacks in that era that he was playing in. So they must also be committed to what they want to do. They must be empathetic as well. I think they have to understand, have good interrelationship skills with people, and in particular, they'd be humble. And all the ones that I can think of, the people that I remember, there's a young lad called Henry Wong Do, who was a brilliant musician. You know, he's now doing a concert pianist routine around the world. And Jonathan Chen, another great pianist as well. These guys were so humble, you wouldn't know that they were going to be stars of the future, but they are.
That's how I feel about you sometimes. Until I wrote your introduction today, I didn't realize half the things you'd achieved as well. So you're clearly embodying the same traits that you're helping instill. But just on that topic of success, it's obviously pretty certain that we've all had to make major accommodations during this time. And I certainly keep hearing the phrase thrown around, you know, the new norm, not just in education, but in workplaces pretty much everywhere we go. I'm curious whether, as a country, our definition of student success has also gone through kind of an evolution, given the way that schools have been forced to pivot during this time of global disruption. I'd really like to explore this more deeply, John, and I'm curious if you could share some of the notable changes and challenges that you've observed occurring not just in New Zealand, but also globally from an educational standpoint.
Well, I guess you're looking at it from a sort of global perspective. You know, there were school closures as a result of COVID in 188 countries. So there was 1.7 billion students not at school. And in fact, some of those students are still not at school. They've been off for at least 6 months, if not longer. Exams have been cancelled or postponed or modified, as in New Zealand, with the latest announcements yesterday with NCEA. And also universities have been forced to amend their entrance criteria as well. So there is no doubt there's potential learning loss. I mean, that goes without saying. But also, like, tied into that is the sort of a curbing of educational aspirations, disengagement from school, and which will all have a negative outcome on their students when they go for the exams and so on. But I think you can't also overcome the fact that there are also economic and social consequences resulting from this as well. And in particular, you know, the homelessness and the fact that this is going to impact on the more disadvantaged groups more than anybody else. So there was a tricky situation to overcome. In New Zealand during this time, you're looking at around about 750,000 students also out of school and learning online. And I think they were, I guess you could say, they were achieving variable success doing this. Some schools did it very well, some not so well. And I think that both students, parents, teachers all had to adapt, and they all had to be able quickly. Remember, within a week, we had to, schools were closed, what do we do next? It was that sort of situation. And I think what's shown from all that is that the mechanics of remote instruction are actually not necessarily always inclusive or equitable, and that's a bit of an issue that we have to face in the future. So it's a massive challenge switching to distance learning, and also the time that it takes to integrate the technologies. When we set up the school, we had about 4 months to actually set it up, which was amazing anyway, 4 months. But it took that long to get everything organised, to get the staff appointed and so on, so they knew what the technology was. I think the other problems that come out of this are the attendance challenges, that students just were not attending the actual lessons at all. In France, for example, 88% of students couldn't be reached by their teachers after only 2 weeks of it. They'd had enough after 2 weeks and they disappeared off the grid. In LA, 13% of students also had no contact with teachers after 3 weeks. So, you know, many students struggled to maintain their learning pace from home. It just wasn't working for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've been in the education space for a really long time. Have you just observed any disruptions that have been similar to this? And if so, can you kind of talk about some of the similarities and differences?
Yeah, well, I guess the only one that I can think of is the Christchurch earthquake of 2011, where, of course, that actually also forced schools to close, and students didn't know what they were doing. In fact, there was a mass migration out of Christchurch to schools elsewhere. During that time, I was headmaster of grammar still, and we enrolled a number of students from Christchurch who came to live in the grammar zone and get into the school that way. So that was one disruption, and I think that was probably not as bad as what we're going through now. This is a pandemic. It's way beyond even what happened in terms of the schooling closures during that. I think other disruptive events, perhaps worth mentioning, which a lot of students wouldn't be familiar with will be in the mid-90s, the government introduced something called bulk funding of teacher salaries, and that split the school sector in a big way, with the unions becoming involved as well. And so schools were offered the chance of getting bulk money to pay teachers, rather than what is done normally every fortnight. You get your pay and it comes from the government. But there was a sort of a two school systems separate then. And the other one was the introduction of NCA, which also caused a lot of problem and a little bit of heartache in certain schools, my own included. And that tended to group into two schools as well. Those who wanted something different to NCA, something that was perhaps more rigorous and demanding and more internationally recognised than NCA. So, that was another one where you have two different sort of groups setting up in school. So they're both disruptors in a way. You could even add in the 2007 curriculum change, which is also a disruptor as well in terms of the nature of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say there's anything that we can necessarily learn, either from the earthquake or the defunding of the schools, that might be useful as kind of a guiding light in this time?
Well, I think there's lots of things that we could learn from. I don't necessarily think there's actually just one really good answer. There's no common template for anything that happens during that time. And I think we can perhaps discuss that in a little bit more detail later on. But it's an important consideration. I think at the present time we've got remote learning, we've got digital learning. Obviously, it's going on still in some areas, but I don't know there's anything that we can learn necessarily right away and say, yeah, this is great. We're going to go. This is the answer to everything. I don't think that's actually quite right yet.
Yeah, and I guess that's probably why it's taken us some time to normalize, and it was certainly chaotic at first. But I think we're very lucky to be in a situation with technology and really that ability to share our learning as well quite broadly. And I guess that's what you're doing a little with CGA. I know you worked with some other principals around New Zealand to give them advice on how to pivot online as well. I guess that brings me to my next question, which is that obviously with so many people on this call, we know that a lot of parents and students are concerned about the situation, and definitely the impact it'll have on future educational opportunities, job opportunities. I'm curious what you're hearing about those fears and whether you agree or disagree with those perspectives, John.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's fairly obvious that there's a considerable disquiet among parents about the impact of school closures on their kids' educational progress. I mean, that's only natural. OECD, for example, and Harvard Graduate School did a survey on this, and they've estimated that there's at least 2 months of instruction lost for 50% of primary and secondary school students, and that's looking globally. However, if you look at just taking the Christchurch earthquake as an example, John Hattie, who was Professor of Education at York University and now at Melbourne University, did research on the impact of school closures in Christchurch on learning outcomes. And he found out that there was only what he called, quote, tiny effects on students' outcomes. And it didn't undermine performance in the external examinations at the end of the year. And the reason behind that was interesting. It was that teachers actually just focused on what has to be learned, as opposed to broadening the picture and using different examples, but just forcing them to do the stuff for the examinations. And so they did well out of that. I think there's been also some unexpected benefits of distance learning from a parent's point of view. Parents might argue the toss of me over this, but I think the fact that parents have had to become involved in the day-to-day challenges of their children's education, overseeing assignments, helping them out when they get stuck, sharing resources between siblings and so on, all that actually brings them closer to their children, also to education, seeing what the sort of work they're doing at school. And I think it also made parents more aware of how important a teacher is in their educational progress. So it is a point, though, and probably worth mentioning, that the impact of school closures, I think, will vary depending on the age of the kids. Obviously, the senior school students, they worry about external exams, but we've already seen with John Hattie's point that judicious teaching can get them through that. But with the younger kids at primary school, for example, they do need a level of guidance, social interaction, tactile learning experiences to help them get through this time. And of course, that's not easy to do through remote learning. So, I think, though, when you toss everything together and have a look at it, that I believe the effects of 2 months of disruption learning may actually fade out by the time students complete their school education. And I can perhaps give you a personal view on that. My son, well, my wife and I and my son went overseas for 3 months when he was in Form 2, which is year 8. I got a Wolf Fisher scholarship to travel and do some research on education. And so we took Andrew with us. And so he had 3 months away from school. And, to be honest, he coped pretty well. We had to do a bit of work with him over there, but not too intense. And he managed to get through school. He's a lawyer now, so he's done all right, I guess. But, I think that we can panic overly about this and think, well, okay, look, it'll come right. And after, when you look at the whole school year or school years, then that 2 months will disappear.
Yeah, you're right. I'd say it's so circumstantial as well. But at the same time, sometimes you have to, get thrown in the deep end to learn a few things about yourself as well. I'd say the case of my little brother, he is, no offense to Sean if you're watching right now, but not the most independent learner. And I think we've definitely seen a lot of growth just in the last few months in terms of, having to take ownership of yourself and your learning and, making that a priority if it's important to you. So I think those are probably valuable lessons as well that most of us don't get on later on in life. I guess there's still very much, though, like a prevalent sentiment that this has kind of been maybe to some extent a year wasted. 2 months is a long time considering, kids only study, 6, 7, 8 months of the year. So for families who have, and there have been a few families who've had quite poor experiences with their school's transition to online learning, to the extent that parents have the ability to impact their child's education outcomes, do you have any steps or any resources that you think they should explore to mitigate some of those fears?
Well, there's a fair bit of information on the web, and of course you've got to be careful a little bit of what's on the web because we don't know what we don't know really. But looking at if you're thinking about school closures, and we have to think that maybe in the future we'll be locked down again and the schools will be closed again because we thought after 102 days of no more cases we'll be fine, and then suddenly it all pivots back the other way. And so we're back now to school closures, and you just need to think about what's happening in West Auckland at the moment with St Dominic's, Liston College, Henderson North, Mount Albert Grammar. They've all got problems, and I see St Dominic's is just closed again till the end of this week. So I think if you think about during school closures, first of all, I think to ensure a reasonable continuation of learning, I think parents need to discuss with their children the weekly learning schedule that they've got to go on. So again, parents are involved. There's no doubt that parents have to be involved to make it successful. To look at the assigned tasks, make sure they get done, set weekly goals, celebrate their achievements even, and create a proper learning environment from the home where there's no disturbances and it's a supportive environment. Participate in their learning, and I think that's something that is a real plus if you can, but also ensure time for play, a bit of recreation, getting out and about, running around. And also I think to keep communication open with the school because, there'll still be somebody at school and they're there to answer. And so it's important that you do keep that communication going. On the other hand, if you're going back to school, which has just happened in the last week or so, and I have my 2 granddaughters have both been going back to school, that creates different challenges really, and is fraught with added anxiety as well, I think, because, you balance the need to stop the virus, but at the same time to get students into more productive learning environments. And that's a really important thing to do. And I think lots of countries around the world are now facing that because the latest research and numbers that I've got is that around about 105 countries that have closed schools have now decided on a date to reopen them. And so, parents and children in those countries will be concerned very much about what's going on. And I think that there's a lot of students who return to school in New Zealand as well with some stress for lots of reasons. And there is probably an important one is the lowering of students' academic motivation. They might think, well, what's the difference now? The year's over just about. And so, it's really hard for a parent to try and keep help them rebuild friendships at school, encourage students' aspirations, encourage them to keep going because it is important. So I think in terms of transitioning back to school, I think parents need to re-establish normal routines and lead up to school, make sure they're back into the normal things that they would do normally. Reassure the children that it's actually safe to go back to school because you can't, this is, you're probably going to be fine. The schools will be looking after you. But prepare your child also for changes in the usual school processes. Like, for example, I know the primary school that my grandchildren go to, they've got to go into a certain into school a certain door. They've got to wait for the teacher. They've got to be checked and so on. Only one parent's allowed to take them. And so things like that, it's different, and it can upset children, particularly younger ones. And I think ask lots of questions of the school as well if you're not sure. What should I do? My child's fallen behind. Is there anything that you can do for them? What should I do if my child is struggling to get back into the school mode, into the school habits? Because that's something else after so long away. And also, what steps is the school taking to ensure the safety of my child? Because that's something that's really good. And I know the school that my grandchildren go to, there've been fantastic communication from the school home to the family. So that's something really important.
Yeah, I really liked what you mentioned about the emotional well-being of kids, because obviously we're focusing lots on their physical health. We all have to right now. Obviously, the academics are something, that they've clearly missed out on for a while. But emotional well-being is probably the hardest aspect because you can't really Google it. So definitely like having that support system at home is really important when kids aren't getting that at school. John, I'm really curious, within or beyond New Zealand, who do you think is getting it right, whether it be like specific countries or governments or other schools? And are there any particular people you're personally looking to for guidance during this time?
Well, as I sort of briefly mentioned a while ago, there's no sort of common template as to what's going to happen from here on. I mean, some schools are going back full on, so they're face to face. That's everything going. Some are actually going just starting, as I mentioned in the States, just remotely, and some are creating a hybrid model. Yeah. So you've got some face to face, and you've got some blended learning, if you like. I know that you look at the US, which is in an absolute terrible state. 3/4 of the 50 largest school districts have decided to start the year remotely. They're not going to have face-to-face teaching. That's a massive, massive decision. Kenya has announced schools will stay closed till 2021. Again, that's a big decision. Philippines have decided to keep schools closed till a vaccine becomes available. Well, that could be a long, long time. However, on the other hand, Netherlands are planning to open schools full time, and the UK has just done the same as well. So I don't think there's any one-size-fits-all strategy to determine the optimal model for learning in this COVID crisis. I mean, there's lots of things happening, and I think that you've got to be adaptable and flexible because things change, as we found pretty quickly a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on how America's not doing so well during this time. And I think you were probably referring to high schools in particular when you were talking about that. But I'm conscious that probably a lot of people on this call, being interested in Crimson Global Academy, probably also interested in, tertiary schools and universities in the States and the UK. How do you think this is affecting them? And what should people be mindful of about, how admissions might be looking different this year, how the college experience might be looking different as, people look to that being the next step of their lives?
Yeah, I think probably, Gia, you can probably better answer that because you're in this situation yourself this year, having had a year at Duke University on a Robertson Scholarship. And now, of course, it's not feasible for you to go over there. Perhaps you could outline that situation because that is, I mean, it's personal, but it's also very relevant.
Good way to turn it around. No, I mean, it is a challenge, that's for sure. School looks really different this year. And a lot of people living on campus are doing their classes online. But these schools are built to be resilient, built for stuff like this. And I think they CGA have done a lot of work in terms of pivoting online properly. At the end of the day, I'd say one of the most valuable things about going to a prestigious school is the people and those types of connections and pools that you build. And that's not something you necessarily lose just because you go online. I think it just looks a little different. And it's about being open-minded in the ways that you'll have to socialize differently and potentially make a lot more effort to develop those types of connections on a deeper level because it's easy when you're bumping into people down the hallway and living amongst your friends. It's different when you're in your room and sitting in front of a screen for quite a few hours a day. So I think it's very much something I'm observing with CGA as a high school as well, is that all the same elements exist. Kids get to socialize, kids get to do extracurriculars. They just do them differently. They look a little different. That would be my take on it.
Yeah, I think also we talk about online learning, and that means different things to different people as well. There are so many different types of online learning available. In New Zealand, we've always had Te Kura, which is the old correspondence school, and that's more of what we would call an asynchronous operation. So mainly it's sending out resources, kids doing the resources, send them back to March, with a little bit of synchronicity in there as well. And also in New Zealand, we've also got something called NetNZ, which is a grouping of schools that get together and do online education for schools that don't or can't offer the number of subjects that they really want to. So there are different types. You've got the correspondence school model, you've got the MOOCs and the Khan Academy model, which is really just a repository of content. And it's been well proven, particularly in the States, that that doesn't operate particularly successfully, around about 90% to 95% dropout rate, because people haven't got teachers to actually motivate, to structure things and to explore things with them. And so that doesn't really work. And I think that one of the things that we've set up with Crimson is a synchronous one. So we've got real-time live teachers in every lesson. And there's one thing that will not change with online education in that area, and that you need great teachers. You need teachers who are able to put things into a context and to help students understand where to go next. It's the scheduling of things and organisation and the prioritising of things. So I think that's really, really important that you've got that. And I think that CGA, hopefully, could well be a catalyst in a way to create a new and perhaps more effective alternative to face-to-face bricks and mortar schools. There's no doubt in my mind that bricks and mortar schools will stay. I mean, they're part and parcel of a really good education, so we're not putting them down at all. But I think they will also have to modify and be adaptable and change. And, you know, I've heard through the grapevine a number of schools now are sort of combining the face-to-face with online education in terms of like a blended way. And I think that in the future, that's probably actually what's going to happen. Pearson, for example, or Pearson are a very major education group around the world. They've just done a 2020 survey, and they came up with a very, very clear view about what would happen in the future, and that is that blended learning will become the norm, and if you like, the new normal. So yeah, I think that whole idea of having teachers still involved on the online education is really important. Teachers, you know, great teachers make a school great, not the other way around. It's great teachers make a school great. And without great teachers, you're not going to actually get there, you know. And there's a great quote from Henry Adams about teachers never knowing where their influence stops. You know, they can affect eternity. And I think that is something that keeps teachers teaching, because they certainly don't do it for the money. They do it because of that. So while it's very easy now to access knowledge online, that's fine, but it's not the same as understanding it. And that's where great teachers come in, helping students learn how to evaluate, to manipulate, and to apply that knowledge. And in my mind, and from my own personal experience, and what I've also seen at CJ with the teachers that we've appointed, it's certainly the teachers who foster that magic of learning that does build in students a desire to be the best that they can be and to aspire to do great things, something that's extraordinary rather than ordinary. So, you know, teaching as such, I think, will still be vital in an online environment, blended or otherwise.
That's really interesting. I guess what I'm curious about, John, and what I imagine a lot of people are wondering is what you described as a good school, and it would be a good person or online, because, you know, it's the teachers, it's the teaching quality, it's that engagement. The two questions I had is, first, you know, what makes CGA you know, different in a positive way to physical schools, and what are the other merits of going to an online school like CGA for students?
Yeah, well, look, it's like anything. It's not, online learning is not for everybody, and let's be honest about that, and neither is face-to-face. But with CGA, what we've managed to do is to get a group of teachers who are absolutely outstanding. They're experts in their subjects, and that's a major plus. You know, you need that. We've also got a very rigorous and demanding curriculum. Those are the two critical things you need when you have a school, whether it's online or whether it's face-to-face. But I think the advantage of an online in our place, we have a very small school roll numbers in terms of the classes. So we will start a class with 3 students, and we won't go any higher than 12. 12 is the maximum from there. And the great thing about that is that it's interactive teaching. It's participatory. In fact, in the school that we saw at Stanford Online High School in January when we went over there, the kids get marks for participation and interactivity. So it's like, in a normal bricks and mortar school, you can be sitting in the back row and just have a bit of a snooze and nobody will probably know. But in an online education, online teaching, you are front and center. You're right there. You're right in the middle. You can't do that. You can't hide. You've got to be there. And so, the teaching that goes on with us is very interactive. There's lots of discussion, lots of demonstrating, lots of exploring stuff, lots of what I call cold calling. So, lots of questions, lots of answers, lots of quizzes to make sure that they're on board, and a whole range of skills and tools that we have as part of the online learning environment. So the personalization is also a very important section of this advantage too, because, when you've got small numbers, the teacher knows exactly what you're doing. They can see what's happening and make sure that you're engaged all the way through. So that's a really significant advantage. And I think also what we're doing, we've got both part-time and full-time students. The part-time students come to us because they want to accelerate their learning. They want to make sure they get a great CV, and so they want to do more A-levels than they would necessarily be able to get anywhere else. And also the fact is that they feel that they're getting a very good deal at the school as well. And so that part-time, full-time situation is worthwhile. Because it's part-timers, that encourages students who may well be great sportsmen or sportswomen, could be good artists or musicians, and they want to practice, they want to be part of an academy that does that all day, or they can come to us after school and they can do their work between 4 o'clock and 9 o'clock. We run a 12-hour, in fact, we run a 24-hour timetable now because we're just teaching students now in the Middle East and the UK and Europe, as well as in Asia and New Zealand. So we're truly a global school now, and that's quite good for the school in terms of diversity as well. You're mixing with a wide range of people. You get to know them actually. You do get to know them on there. We have a communication channel, which I'm still getting used to, but it's called Slack. And we have the Slack channels for students. So they interact and talk to each other, and they've got various channels about studying, creating study buddies, favorite subjects they like, and so on. So there is that sort of, that integration that exists still on an online environment.
Yeah, and it's not just about diversity then either. I guess it's about accessibility, in the sense that, students aren't limited just to the resources in their area or the teachers in their area necessarily. I guess it's different for us in New Zealand because we are pretty blessed to have, fortunately, a lot of really amazing teachers and a lot of, public schools that also offer real high quality education. But how do you see that kind of growing worldwide?
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing now. We've only just opened our UK Northern Hemisphere timetable last week, so this is very early. But the students we're getting are a wide range. We're getting a significant number from Eastern Europe, even coming in, and from the Middle East, and they want to do A-levels. They want to do more than they can get at their normal school. So, for example, if you're at a school in the UK, they would normally in their final year at school only do 3 A-levels. That's the norm. Whereas here in New Zealand, we do 5. And at CGA, they can do 5 or 6 if they feel that they've got the time to do that. And so what it means is that when they apply for their universities overseas, or in the UK even, and they've got 4 or 5 A-levels compared to 3, and they've got A's and A stars in it, well, they're going to get a better chance to get in to the uni of their choice. And so that's a real plus in terms of what we can offer as well.
I see. John, I'm seeing a lot of questions come up in the comment section about, the type of courses provided by CGA, whether they're recognized globally, and also what courses they are, what curriculum they are. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, as those that are involved in A-levels overseas will probably realize this, but there are 3 main providers of the International A-level program, which is internationally recognized. You can get to any university anywhere in the world with the International A-level without a shadow of a doubt. And in fact, if you do really well in your A-levels, you can bypass the first year and go straight into year 2, particularly in the States. That's a really important bonus. The 3 providers, there's AQA, there's OCR or Cambridge, and then there's Pearson EdXL. And we chose Pearson EdXL for a number of reasons. It's a modular A-level program, which I think suits the online environment better. It's highly rigorous. The curriculums are very demanding. We believe more demanding than AQA and also even of Cambridge, particularly in certain subjects. And so that's the way we do it. It's a 2-year program. You can't go straight into a final A2, your final year A-level. you've got to do an AS first, and that counts 50% towards your final mark, and then you do another 50% in your A2s in last year, and that gives you your final result. The modules that the modular program is helpful in that every subject is divided into either 4 or 6 modules. The sciences and maths have 6 modules, all the rest have 4. So you do half of those in AS and half in the A2. The issue there is, say, for example, in history, my subject, you do well in 3 modules when you bomb out in 1. Instead of having to reset the whole paper, you can just reset that 1 module at the next exam session.
Mm.
And also, Pearson have 3 exam sessions, which is another bonus. We have October, November, we have January, and we also have May, June as well. So in terms of resetting, it's possible to do that. And that reset isn't notified on the report. It just goes straight to your final mark. So you cash in that mark, and that's an advantage for you as well. So it's a fantastic curriculum. It's a gold standard, and there's no university of note anywhere that would not accept the international A-level, and that's the reason we do it. It's really important that, we know, well, about globalism and internationalism and so on. And it's a fact that the students who are leaving school now from CGA or from wherever are going to be in an international marketplace. It's different. They are. They're going to be competing with kids all over the world if they want to get into top unis or even in top jobs as well. And so your qualifications really have to have international recognition. They have to be able to stand up and say, well, look, this is a great thing. It's equivalent to the UK A-level. It's verified by a group called NARIC, which is an independent group. And so it's exactly the same. There's no difference in terms of the equivalence or credibility of the qualifications.
That's really interesting. John, I'm seeing another very, very interesting comment by Andrew saying, what training do the teachers who are employed by Crimson get in regards to education and technology? I asked this question as my experience is that the vast majority of teachers in normal schools have not been given the training they need to meet the needs of students.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it was a bit of a shock to our teachers when we appointed them, of course, that things are a little bit different. If they're great teachers, they're still the great teachers online. But the point is that there are technology things that they need to know. And we're very fortunate because Crimson's an education technology company. And so we've got a list of gurus here in terms of technology who can help us and guide us in that. We were also fortunate that we appointed our major HODs at the beginning of the year in February. And so they had February, March, and a little bit of April to get their act together in terms of technology. And so we used to run demo lessons. We used to go through and find out what works and what doesn't work. It's interesting that some teachers use a lot of the tools that are possible in technology. Others still teach a little bit differently. They still use them, but probably not as much as others. And of course, all the time we're getting new techniques and technologies coming along as well. So it's a constant thing to try and improve them. So the training was excellent. Some that came in, there's one teacher in particular that we employed who was a brilliant teacher because I taught with him elsewhere. But he never had any idea about technology. He's now a bit of a guru himself. It's just that it was lifelong learning. That's what it's all about. And I'm learning as well, I can tell you. So we're all learning about technology, and the training that we get is very, very good.
That's awesome. That's awesome. John, I'm quite curious. So I know you have 2 grandchildren as well, and this is moving a little bit away from CGA, but 2 grandchildren as well who've, I guess, been thrust into online schooling this year. How do your experiences as a grandparent compare to those as an educator? And what I'm most curious about is, would you put your kids in an online school as well?
Okay. Well, the first part of that, I think initially, my granddaughter, my eldest one is just turning 8 very shortly, and the youngest one's just turned 5. So, they were both actually really excited by Zoom initially. That was exciting. Zoom there, really excited when the principal every morning would read them a story through Zoom.
Little backgrounds and everything.
That was great. But they did do regular work as timetabled by the school. It wasn't sort of all face-to-face. It wasn't sort of all synchronous, but a lot of it was. And in fact, I think they quite enjoyed it for a while. But then, enthusiasm waned a little bit. And as you get through, when you go 8 weeks without, getting with your mates and talking to people and so on. So then after that, it was down to the parents to help them. And I think, that was hard when my daughter, who's their mother, was also working from home as well. So having to try and work from home as well as make sure that they're still learning and doing things, was very, very tricky. So it was up to Nicola to make sure they were motivated and interested. And I think probably one of the biggest disappointments for me was that Gabrielle, our youngest one, her first day at school was via Zoom. And I think that's a bit of a letdown for her. She was hoping that it was going to be as a proper school, going in there and doing the right things. So, yeah, look, they've coped pretty well, and I think they enjoyed a fair bit of it. But I think they're pretty keen to be back at work now, back at school. In terms of sending my own children, my children are well grown up, so there's no chance of that at all. But I think that, what you need to think about when you're sending your own... Sorry, what's that?
Grandchildren, of course.
Yeah, but my own children are well gone. But I think if I was sending my kids to an online school, I think they'd have to. I'll give you some characteristics. I think they'd have to be highly organised. That's because this is the things that I'll make sure you've got success in online school. Highly organised. You've got to be an independent learner that you want to learn. You've got to be pretty tech savvy. You know what all the tools are about, because you've got to do that. I think you need strong time management skills as well. You know what's going on, and you know what's organised, and how to motivate yourself, how to plan things. So motivation, you've got to be aspirational, able to prioritise, and I think be inquisitive as well. Be lots of questions. That's the important thing. So, luckily, I had kids that, were pretty well motivated and so on. So, they would probably fit into that sort of category, but they would probably have to adjust to different elements of that. I've lost G at the moment, but that's okay. We'll carry on, I think. So look, that's sort of the way that I would look at it. If I had children who were in all those categories, I think, well, that would work. It'd be fine. But luckily, my children really enjoyed school and they did well there. So that was good, and that was a long time ago. Over to you, Gia.
Am I back? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, but I can't see you.
It seems online learning, online Zooming wasn't built for me today. If you can hear me, though, I am curious. I guess, COVID is something we're probably going to have to live with for, at least a few more years. So I'm curious, do you think all schools are going to move towards online or towards a blended online, offline learning? What do you kind of prophesize the future of education looking like?
Yeah, that's a hard one. It's hard for anybody to come up with what's going to happen in the future. But you're right. COVID will be with us for a bit longer, and so we have to sort of think about that. But I think the fact is that a return to business as usual is probably not going to be on the cards long term. I think now it is, because short term they've all gone in and they've got started and got exams coming up, so everybody's more focused. But I think in the future, I think there'll be not entirely face to face or not entirely online. I think it will be the blended environment. It just seems there's a very strong indication from all the research that's going on. OECD have done a lot, McKinsey's have done a lot as well, and their research would show that the blended learning is the way to go. However, just as a sort of as a warning, just giving students in a class devices will not improve student learning. That's not online learning at all. That's been proven to fail. What you need is something that is a bit more structured, like we're doing at CGA. That will help get through that. And I think that the blended learning is probably a really good way to go. What we think about now, we are Generation Z, right? And so we've grown up in the students that we're teaching now have grown up in a digital world. They're used to it. And so they can cope quite easily with the online environment as well as the face-to-face. There's no problem there at all. It's just a part of their life. They're used to that. It's an extension of their consciousness and of their identity, really. And so there's no way that they would not survive in that situation. So I think a combination of those two, getting a bit of face-to-face, a little bit of the online as well, and that will be a blended learning environment. Can I just
Shane asked...
Sorry, just add one thing on that.
Yes,
I think
John, go.
One thing that COVID has shown us really is that, you don't have to have one stereotyped way of doing things. And the whole idea of having 30 kids in a class, we're no longer bound by that, so you don't have to have that. and that physical formality of classroom culture will probably melt away a little bit as well. So, you know, when you think about it, millions of kids have been learning online over the last 6 months, probably, just about. And so I think that's something that will never go away.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. John Shane asks, what is the exam structure like at CGA? I think what I'm seeing from these questions is that people are trying to visualize, I guess, what it's like to go to an online school, not just as tutoring, not just as like, you know, a part-time thing. How does it actually look and feel and work? So firstly, what is the exam structure like? And also, how do students take exams? Is it online or in person? How does that work?
Okay, that's a very good question. Well, I'll go to the exam situation first. Pearson and Excel, they do a lot of online examinations in the US at the present time with the schools they own over there. And at this time next year, in fact, earlier than this, in May of next year, a lot of the exams that EdXL will put on for our students will be online. And so that's a learning experience for all as well. Within the school itself now, as we go, we have one exam at the end of each term. So we're just a regular school in that sense. We are registered with the Ministry of Education, so we're obligated in every way in terms of attendance. It's not a choice to come to school. It's mandatory, like a normal school. And so we are normal in that sense. We have also parent-teacher evenings once a term as well. The exams at the moment, we're doing paper exams, but we will be moving into online exams as well as a preparation for when Pearson EdXL bring theirs in next year too. So the online exams can be done. We know how we can do them, but at the end of the day, we have to practice first, and we have to get the students to know it. Teachers know how to do it, or pretty much do, but students are the ones that really have to know how to cope with that. And I guess one of the issues is the use of computers and the touch typing that most students don't really have. That can slow you down a little bit. And so there's different techniques that's going to have to be learned in order to have really success at online education. So, yeah, look, it's something that I think will happen in the future, and there's no doubt that it'll be, I think, a really good asset to that as well.
Oh,
just on screen, you've got something from
there we
Jamie.
go. I think I'm
working. Jamie's sharing
got
something.
From Jamie. I just missed it,
Carry on.
I think it's gone. I'm going to carry on. I'm going to carry on. John, I'm kind of curious. I shared what I think about socializing in kind of an online learning environment from more of a college perspective. But you mentioned that CGA has part-time and full-time kids. So what does socialization look like for the full-timers? And how do they get that in their day-to-day if it's, 6 hours of classroom learning?
Yeah, okay. Well, the socialization, look, I think what people don't quite get unless you've been involved in this a little bit is that the students actually do talk to each other, and they can talk to each other. They can either do it, partly way through the lesson. We don't really want too much of that for obvious reasons, but they can do that, and they can talk to each other after the lesson as well, either through Slack or through email, just like normal. We are having, this weekend, for example, we're having a stand-up meeting of students, believe it or not, from around the world, and so they'll dial in at a certain time and get to talk and meet with their colleagues. One thing we do recommend for online students is the study buddies. That's probably the best way to get to know people around, is to form these little groups, and you can talk about that either through the Slack channel or through email or whatever else you might want to use, messaging and so on. There's lots of different ways of doing that. Also, we've got extensive extracurricular activities as well. As I say, we've only been going since the end of April, but we've already got a number of clubs. We've got a Duke of Edinburgh club. We've got debating. We've also got a health and fitness one starting very shortly, thanks to Zach, one of our staffers here. And there's a range of other activities that are actually happening. So, yeah, we have the extracurricular. We also have leadership roles. We have head of school and deputy head girl or boy, and some prefects as well. So that's all going to happen in the next wee while. So the socialization, look, it's different. It's different. There's no doubt about that, but it exists. And the other thing that we would like to do at some stage too, and it won't be this year, but is at certain times to have students come together in, face to face in a physical sense. Those who are living in the Auckland and Northland areas, say. So yeah, look, it happens. And I think
Yeah.
it's going to get even better as well. We're pretty active in terms of getting the extracurriculars. We also have things like the Olympiads, the Biology Olympiad and Maths Olympiad that students can get involved with. Our biology teacher, Max Thompson, is a tutor for the New Zealand Olympiad team for biology, so a great asset for us as well.
Yeah, so true that actually as the school grows, you kind of, it solves that problem of socialization on its own because there's more kids in all the big cities who get to kind of connect with each other.
Yeah.
Holly asks, how do the teachers deal with students who aren't good at online study? Which is actually a question I was going to raise too, because, you mentioned, you have to be mature, you have to be tech, you have to be organized to succeed in an online learning environment. But surely those are also skills that can be developed, and not everyone starts off being, 10 out of 10 at all of them.
No, look, it's exactly right. I mean, I think there is a sort of a limit to what we can do online with students who are struggling academically with that. But we are prepared, obviously, to work with them on that. We have a very good pastoral care network. We've got a dean that operates as the head of pastoral care and looks after students that are struggling in that sense as well. We've also got teachers who are trained in that area to help as well. But I think, look, you're right. As long as they're keen to learn and they're motivated and want to do better, then obviously they will get better. The intelligence is not set. That changes over time as well. And so, there's a real opportunity, I think, for students of all ilks really to join. But the list that I gave you, I mean, that's an optimal list. Not everybody is. You can't tick everybody off for each one of those necessarily. So, we welcome students of different ability to come to the school as well.
Absolutely. Zoe's got a fun question. How did the teachers deal with students when go online and just having games and social media as their motivation? I have a few thoughts on this, but John, I'll let you go first.
Well, I think it's a matter of setting expectations. As I said, we are a school, right? So you expect an excellent behaviour, and the school is all about excellence. That's what we aim for. So you expect excellent behaviour. And look, we when you've got small classes, you're not going to get a lot of classroom management issues for teachers, But those that anything crops up, then we obviously got a system and a process to solve that as well. But I can honestly say that in the time we've been open, the kids have been so supportive and so committed and so want to do well, and are doing well. The exams that we've just had a couple of weeks ago, results were fantastic, and they're obviously committed to that. And so, it is something that you expect and to have to deal with that sort of thing. But in an online environment, really, the classroom management issues are virtually nil.
Yeah, I guess these distractions exist even in normal unless you completely remove devices, which honestly is rarely the case nowadays because kids are learning on laptops and stuff in classes anyway. I'd say, I mean, at least as a young person myself, it's kind of nicer being in an environment that you're intuitively used to, and being able to have recordings of your classes and actually focus on work instead of like all this crazy note taking. I think that tends to be quite motivating for some of the kids who are otherwise maybe a little disenfranchised with the standard learning model, I suppose. I'll take one last question just before we wrap up. Shane asks, do CGA teachers have office hours for students to ask questions outside of virtual class?
We don't set office hours. We don't say, there's a limit to when you can talk to your teachers. I mean, it's interesting that, when we have our staff meetings, the talk is all about, well, I got an email at a certain time, 9:00 at night or whatever it was about something, and sometimes 2:00 in the morning, depending. So we don't set office hours as such, and we do welcome that open communication with staff. It's really interesting. We have teacher booths that teachers teach in, and I'm in one myself, and I can hear what's going on all these. So I've learned a lot about biology since last year, listening to the biology teacher next door to me. But what's interesting to me is that the relationship that teacher has with the kids. It's a very open relationship, and I know there's ongoing communication after the lesson. So while it might be a 1-hour lesson, in fact, the communication goes on a lot longer than that. And so we do the kids know how to contact the teachers at any time. They've got the teachers' emails at the school emails. And so, it's very easy. And even on Slack as well, they can contact them through Slack. So, yeah, you'd be surprised at how interactive that sense is as well in the school. So the interrelationship between teachers and students, I think, is incredibly positive.
And I guess when you have really small classes, there's anyways more opportunity to interact during the class. It's pretty much just like this, except with better internet than mine, I hope. And, you know, that opportunity to go through, not just learn the content, but, you know, go questions, especially in class like English, for example, as a group, like how would we answer this, all of that type of stuff. All right, I am conscious that we have hit 8 o'clock now. So John, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for tolerating this shaky internet. I hope that everyone got at least a little bit out of this in terms of feeling comfortable about a few tangible action steps they can take either as a student or as a parent, and about, you know, how to accelerate during this time. I know towards the end it became more of a conversation around CGA, and I hope that was useful in terms of just exploring some of the other alternatives that are out there. I know that, you know, when I was, you know, at about high school age, I didn't even know that these were options, and so it's really exciting to see this being a legitimate school that kids can go to and not just learn, get a proper qualification out of as well. So thank you once again, John. If any of you are interested in learning more about CGA, you can head to our website and also book a meeting with our academic advisors. Hope everyone has a wonderful Wednesday night. We'll catch you another time.
Okay, thanks, Gia,
Bye-bye.
and thank you everybody for being part of it. Thank you. Bye.
John.